300 miles, the navigator says again, quieter this time, pencil hovering above the chart as if the number itself might detonate. The wardroom is still, except for the soft slap of waves against steel. Somewhere below, a ventilation fan clicks and resumes its uneven spin. It is April 18, 1942, aboard a Japanese patrol vessel off the eastern approaches of Honshu. The radio intercept has just been translated. American aircraft, carrier aircraft, have struck Tokyo. Not from China, not from Siberia, from the sea. The distance is wrong. The math refuses to settle. Japanese naval doctrine has been built on clean radii and fixed assumptions. Carrier aircraft, even the newest American types, are supposed to operate within a predictable envelope, one that Japanese planners have studied, annotated, and rehearsed against since the 1930s. A carrier must come close, close enough to be seen, close enough to be hunted, close enough to die. But these bombers did not come close. The distance is wrong. The math refuses to settle. Someone suggests a transcription error. Another suggests sabotage. No one suggests that the Americans simply flew farther than expected. That idea still feels unserious, like claiming water ran uphill. By evening, the confirmation arrives. Doolittle's raiders, launched from USS Hornet, had taken off more than 600 nautical miles from Japan's coast. The sailors who man the charts and radios feel at first as a physical unease, a tightening behind the eyes. Bearings are rechecked, wind calculations are recalculated. On ships from Yokosuka to Truk, the reaction is not rage, it is vertigo. Japanese sailors had been taught that American industrial strength was clumsy, excessive, and poorly disciplined. American pilots, they were told, relied on mass, not finesse. Their carriers were large, slow-moving targets, floating factories that would announce themselves long before striking distance. The Pacific, vast as it was, had been mentally divided into zones of control and safety. Those zones evaporated overnight. In the days after the raid, destroyer crews scan the horizon differently. The binoculars linger longer on empty water. The sea, once a buffer, now feels like a corridor. On the bridge of a light cruiser in the North Pacific, a junior officer notes in his log that visibility is excellent, then crosses the word out and writes excessive. What unsettles them most is not the damage. The bombs that fell on Tokyo caused limited physical destruction. Fires were extinguished. Factories resumed work. Casualties were relatively low. That should have been comforting. It is not. Because the attack reveals intent and capability rather than force, it demonstrates that American carriers can project power far beyond the range the Imperial Japanese Navy had prepared to counter. And worse, it shows a willingness to attempt the improbable. For sailors raised on the certainty of plans and margins, this is corrosive. On board Akagi, aircrew commanders gather in cramped briefing rooms thick with cigarette smoke. Maps are unrolled. Red grease pencil circles expand outward, then outward again. Each expansion brings silence. To defend the home islands now requires more patrol aircraft, more fuel, more ships spread thinner across more water. There is no clean solution. The Americans have turned distance itself into a weapon. In mess halls, the talk becomes cautious, technical. Pilots argue over fuel mixtures and bomb loads. Deckhands listen, pretending not to. Someone mentions that the American bombers flew without fighter escort. Someone else replies that escort range no longer matters if the strike aircraft themselves can reach so far. Trays clatter. Rice goes cold. What had once been a clear hierarchy of reach, battleships, then carriers, then land-based air, has collapsed into something amorphous and threatening. The ocean no longer protects, it exposes. By May 1942, this anxiety hardens into operational urgency. The planned Midway operation accelerates. Carriers are pushed forward with an aggressiveness that leaves little room for error. Sailors feel the tempo increase in their bones. Shorter maintenance windows, tighter turnarounds, longer watches. They do not frame this as fear. Fear is an imprecise word. What they experience is erosion of confidence, of predictability, of the comforting belief that the enemy is bound by the same constraints you are. During the Battle of the Coral Sea, Japanese carrier crews note again how far American aircraft appear to reach. Reports arrive of strikes launched at ranges that stretch expectation. Fuel calculations are checked against reality and found wanting. The Americans seem willing to burn margins the Japanese have been taught to preserve. This is not recklessness, it is a different philosophy of war. By June, at Midway, the consequences become fatal. Japanese carriers, operating at the edge of their own operational limits, are forced to juggle scouting, refueling, and rearming under intense pressure. American carrier aircraft, launched from beyond what Japanese commanders had considered decisive distance, arrive at precisely the wrong moment. When bombs tear through the flight decks of Kaga, Akagi, and Soryu on June 4, 1942, the sailors below decks do not think in grand strategic terms. They think of fuel lines rupturing, of smokes thick enough to taste, of ladders that end in flame. But the shock that began in April is now complete. The enemy has not only reached them, the enemy has outpaced their assumptions. Survivors pulled from the water later speak less about bravery and more about disbelief, not at the loss, but at how it unfolded, how the Americans seemed to appear from nowhere, how the sky filled with aircraft that should not have been there yet. Even after Midway, the lesson lingers. On remote island garrisons, Japanese sailors watch the horizon and calculate silently. How far can they come from? How long do we have? The answers no longer settle the mind. By 1943, American carrier task forces roam the Pacific with growing confidence, launching strikes from distances that dwarf early war norms. New aircraft, better logistics, and relentless training extend the reach further still. Japanese sailors adapt where they can, but the psychological damage has already been done. They had been taught that war followed rules written by experience and precedent. The Americans rewrote those rules using range, fuel, and audacity. And so the sea changes character. What was once a shield becomes a liability. What was once empty becomes occupied by possibility. Every mile of water now conceals not safety, but approach. For the Japanese sailors standing watch at dusk, salt drying on his collar, eyes fixed on a horizon that never seems close enough, the greatest shock is not the aircraft themselves. It is the realization that distance, the oldest comfort of naval warfare, no longer belongs to him.